He stood handcuffed where the judges had once smiled at him from behind the barrier. His badge no longer glittered. His name was now a charge. He was a cop who looked like a hero, and she was a lawyer he didn't even notice until it was too late. How did all this happen? How did one cop end up in the dock and one woman at the center of a court scandal that shook the entire system? Let's start with how it all began, in a courtroom where no one was expecting a storm. If you're ready to hear a story that breaks through the silence and makes you think, click, like, subscribe, and prepare to listen carefully. This is not just a story. It's a stab of truth to the heart, and it will stay with you for a long time. The courtroom was unusually warm for a March morning. The sun sliced through the tall windows, casting long, golden blades across the oak-paneled walls. Officer Garrett Knox adjusted his collar as he stood before the witness stand, the glint of his badge catching the light like a mirror held to arrogance. His gaze swept the room, cold and certain. Another trial, another notch. He was used to being the hammer in a world full of nails. But he didn't notice the woman in the second row. Not yet. She wore red, not the kind of red that screamed for attention, but the kind that warned you not to look away. Her heels clicked softly as she shifted, a pin poised between her fingers, her expression unreadable. Her name wasn't in the file Knox had scanned over that morning. Just another public defender, he thought. Disposable. A delay on his schedule, not a threat. He should have read the fine print. The case was simple on paper. State versus Miguel Rivera. Possession with intent. The drugs were found in a car during a routine stop, Knox's stop. He claimed the suspect had been twitchy, evasive, matching the profile. The trunk was locked. The dog alerted. And just like that, 11 years of someone's life was about to evaporate under mandatory minimums. Judge Wallace, an old friend of the badge, presided like always. Jokes in chambers. Dismissals on technicalities, only for the right kind of officers. Knox had been through this dance too many times to be nervous. But when the judge asked for opening remarks, and the woman in red stood, her voice broke the courtroom's stillness like glass underfoot. My client has been here before, she said. I's trained on the jury. But so has the officer who arrested him. And today, we're going to talk about why. Knox felt the first sting of discomfort. It wasn't the words. It was the way she said them, calm, clinical, like a surgeon about to open him up. He leaned back in his chair, lips curled in that practiced smirk he gave to rookies and rookies with law degrees. But then she did something no one expected. She held up a photograph. It showed Knox, off-duty, standing outside a motel 2 towns over. Beside him, a woman, much younger, visibly intoxicated. The timestamp, 1 day before the arrest in question. This, the defense attorney said, is not evidence of a crime, but it is evidence of a pattern. And patterns matter. Gasps. Scribbles from the press. The judge leaned forward, eyebrows raised. Knox sat very still, because suddenly the case wasn't about Miguel Rivera anymore. It was about him. And the woman in red, the one he didn't bother to name, just rewrote the rules of the courtroom. The photograph burned in his memory. Officer Knox had faced his share of courtroom theatrics, tearful defendants, angry parents, even the occasional viral protest outside the courthouse steps. But none of it had ever reached the bench. None of it had ever been invited in by a judge. Judge Wallace looked at the photo for a long time. Too long. The silence dragged. Miss, he finally asked, pausing to squint at the defense attorney's file. Washington, is it? How exactly is this relevant? Lena Washington. That was her name. The woman in red. Her voice was composed, but there was fire in the framing. Your Honor, this image was taken less than 24 hours before the search that led to my client's arrest. Officer Knox testified that he was well-rested, on duty, and conducting routine patrols. That timeline and the credibility of that testimony are now in question. She turned, slowly, toward the jury. We have evidence that Officer Knox lied under oath. If his sworn statement about the night before is false, we have reason to challenge the legality of the stop and everything that followed. The prosecutor objected. Too fast. Too loud. Your Honor, this is a deliberate attempt to smear a decorated officer's character. This photo doesn't prove anything except that he had a personal life. The judge tapped his gavel once, weakly. Miss Washington, he said, you're walking a thin line here. Lena didn't flinch. And Officer Knox crossed one. The jury was no longer just listening, they were leaning in. A couple exchanged glances. One woman on the back row tilted her head, frowning in that way jurors do when they start connecting dots no one expected them to see. Knox felt the walls pull closer. His chest tightened. He hadn't seen Lena Washington before this case. He didn't know her record, didn't know she was an investigative attorney with a reputation for bringing internal affairs data into the courtroom. She'd spent 6 years in civil rights litigation before switching to criminal defense, not because it paid better, but because it hurt more. She didn't just defend clients. She exposed patterns. And right now, she had her hand on one that ran through his entire department. Knox whispered something to the prosecutor. Something about striking the image from the record. The prosecutor hesitated, nodded, and stood to speak. Motioned to exclude the photo on the grounds of irrelevance. Denied, Wallace said before he could finish. His voice was quieter this time, because Wallace had recognized the woman in the photograph too. And it wasn't just any woman. It was his niece. For a moment, the judge didn't move. It was a brief flicker, a slight twitch at the corner of his mouth, the kind of involuntary reaction that came not from judicial reasoning but from something older, deeper, something personal. Then it was gone, hidden beneath a mask of routine authority. But Lena saw it. So did Knox. The woman in the photograph, Officer Knox's companion outside the motel, was none other than Samantha Wallace, the judge's estranged niece. It wasn't public knowledge. But Lena had done her homework, and she knew exactly what she was putting on the table. She also knew it wasn't about scandal. Not for her. It was about power, and how it gets used when no one is looking. I'd like to continue with my line of questioning, Lena said, calm as a storm cloud. The judge cleared his throat. Proceed. Knox shifted in his chair. His jaw clenched. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table like he was bracing for a punch. The courtroom lights, usually unnoticeable, suddenly felt hotter on his skin. Lena walked slowly toward the witness stand. You've been with the department 12 years, she said. Yes, Knox replied, his voice stiff. Decorated for service. Several commendations. Correct. And during those 12 years, how many searches have you initiated based on probable cause from your own observation? Knox hesitated. I don't know. Hundreds. Hundreds, Lena repeated. She glanced at the jury. That's hundreds of citizens stopped, questioned, searched, often without a warrant, based solely on your judgment. Objection from the prosecutor. She's editorializing. I'll rephrase, Lena said before the judge could speak. Officer Knox, are you aware of how many of those stops involved individuals later found to be innocent? Knox narrowed his eyes. That's not something I track. But someone does. She turned and walked to her table, pulling a thin folder from her briefcase. The courtroom's collective breath held. This is an internal review conducted last year by the Office of Civilian Oversight, she said, handing a copy to the judge and another to the prosecutor. It was never released to the public, but we subpoenaed it last week. She flipped the first page. Of 347 stops initiated by Officer Garrett Knox between 2019 and 2023, 219 resulted in no charges. No citations. Nothing but a record of suspicion. Knox shifted. You're twisting the data, eh? Am I? She said, turning on him sharply. Or am I just reading it? Silence. Lena turned back to the jury, her voice low but clear. This case is about more than a single stop. It's about a pattern. A pattern of overreach. A pattern of assumption. A pattern that protects the badge, no matter how often it's misused. She walked to her table and tapped the photo one more time, not to show it, but to remind the room what it meant. And when that badge ends up in places it shouldn't be, in lies, in manipulation, in the company of people with ties to this courtroom, we owe it to the law to ask why. She paused, just long enough to let the weight settle. Because the oath he swore doesn't come with exceptions. Not for men like him. And not for judges with blood in the game. The judge's gavel fell, not hard, not loud, but with the finality of a man who had just been reminded that justice, when it finally wakes up, doesn't play favorites. During the recess, the air in the courthouse felt different. The usual murmur of conversations in the marble hallways was replaced by hushed whispers, sidelong glances, and the kind of tension that clung to your skin. Garrett Knox stayed in the witness room. His hands, which once held a sidearm with practiced ease, now shook just enough to make him press them flat against his thighs. Outside the door, his attorney paced. The prosecutor had stopped making eye contact. In courtroom 2B, Lena sat quietly at the defense table. She wasn't reviewing notes. She didn't need to. She'd planted her seed. Now came the silence. The part nobody teaches you about, where truth hangs in the air like smoke and everyone waits to see who chokes first. Behind the bench, Judge Wallace hadn't returned yet. In the gallery, a woman with gray streaks in her hair and a faded coat sat alone in the back row. Her name was Camille Rivera, Miguel's mother. She hadn't said a word all morning, but now she sat forward, hands clasped so tightly the bones in her knuckles turned white. Lena noticed her. Gave a small nod. Camille nodded back. Then, the door opened. Judge Wallace stepped in, slower than before. His robe swayed with less certainty. He paused just before climbing to the bench, a hesitation Lena clocked immediately. He looked at Knox, then at Lena, and finally at the gallery. "I'm issuing a temporary recess until 2 p.m., he said. "The court has matters to review." The courtroom buzzed. Lena stood, collected her files, and walked toward the exit. As she did, the prosecutor caught up to her in the hallway. "You blindsided him," he hissed. "No," she said calmly. "He knew this day was coming. He just didn't think it would arrive in his own courtroom. You don't understand what you're stirring up." Lena stopped. She turned slowly and faced him. "What I'm stirring up," she said, "is every closed-door deal, every buried complaint, every time someone like Knox got to walk out clean while someone else got locked up for being in the wrong place with the wrong skin." The prosecutor's jaw tightened. "You're making enemies." Lena smiled faintly. "Then I'm doing it right." Just as she turned away, a young man in a crisp navy suit approached from the far end of the hallway. He looked nervous but determined. "A law clerk, maybe." He handed Lena a folded sheet of paper. "It's from the courthouse archive," he said quickly. Judge Wallace recused himself from a case in 2017. Defendant was a city contractor. The arresting officer was Knox. Lena's eyes narrowed as she unfolded it. The defendant in that 2017 case had walked. No conviction, no explanation, and no record of why. Until now. Lena read the judge's reason for recusal: potential conflict of interest due to family acquaintance with key witness. She folded the paper again, the corners biting into her fingertips. The key witness in that trial? Officer Garrett Knox. By the time the courtroom reconvened, the gallery had grown. Word had spread, not about the case, but about the way the courtroom had shifted. The usual court watchers, retired clerks, and civic watchdogs filled the benches. There was a new energy in the air, the kind that only comes when people sense something sacred being disturbed. Lena returned to her seat, calm as ever, while Knox sat beside the prosecutor looking distinctly less sure of himself. His tie had been loosened, and his jaw moved as if chewing invisible gum, a tick of a man trying to stay grounded when the earth beneath him had begun to quake. Judge Wallace entered. His face was paler, eye-shadowed. He did not look at Knox. Nor did he look at Lena. Instead, he looked out at the jury. This court has reviewed new documents pertaining to a previous case involving Officer Knox and this court's prior recusal. While the circumstances are not identical, I find it necessary to disclose that Officer Knox has provided testimony in a previous trial involving a relative of mine. A hush fell like a curtain. I did not recall this connection earlier due to the nature of that case and the time that has passed. However, to preserve the integrity of this trial, I am formally recusing myself from further proceedings. The gavel dropped 3 times this time, as if each strike was meant to erase a line in the sand. A stunned silence. Then, a new voice, "Your Honor, if I may?" It was Lena. "While I support your recusal, I ask that the record reflect this is not a matter of oversight. It is part of a pattern." "Counselor," Wallace said, slowly lowering himself back into the seat, "tread carefully." "I intend to," she replied, "because the truth demands it." She turned toward the jury, not to persuade, but to speak plainly. Officer Knox's record shows a consistent pattern of arresting Black and Latino defendants under circumstances that rarely hold up in court. But what doesn't get filed, what doesn't make the docket, is just as important. Dismissals, non-indictments, quiet settlements. And judges like this 1-inch, she gestured gently toward the bench, who recuse themselves only when the pressure becomes visible. There was no objection. The prosecutor just stared forward, hands gripping the table edge. Lena wasn't yelling. She didn't need to. She was naming things people weren't supposed to say aloud. Not in a courtroom like this. Not in a city like this. "This badge," she said, walking over to Knox's witness chair, "is supposed to protect the public. But when it becomes a shield for misconduct, when it's allowed to operate in the dark, unchecked, unquestioned, it doesn't protect anyone. It oppresses." The gallery didn't move. They barely breathed. And when the law allows it, when the judges enable it, and when the people who challenge it get labeled as agitators, we have to ask, who is the system really built for? Lena paused, looked at the jury again. "I'm not just defending Miguel Rivera. I'm defending the idea that justice should mean something, and that no man, no matter how shiny his badge, should be untouchable." The new judge would arrive tomorrow, but the trial had already changed. Because now the truth was in the open. And truth, once exposed, doesn't return to its cage. The next morning, the bench was filled by a woman with a braid of gray-black hair coiled tightly at the base of her neck and a pair of sharp eyes that scanned the room like they'd already read everyone's secrets. Judge Delia Monroe had been brought in from the next district. Known for her no-nonsense demeanor and refusal to entertain politics in the courtroom, she was exactly what Lena had hoped for, a judge with nothing to prove and nothing to lose. She opened proceedings with a firm nod. Let's proceed. Lena didn't waste time. She rose from her seat and walked straight to the evidence projector. A screen lit up. On it, a string of dates appeared, each linked to a name, a location, and one consistent signature, Officer Garrett Knox. This, she said, pointing to the list, is a log of 17 cases over the past 5 years where Officer Knox initiated a search, made an arrest, and saw the case dismissed, not due to innocence, but due to misconduct. Objection. Sustained. Counsel, stick to the case. Lena didn't flinch. Understood, Your Honor. Then let's narrow it down. She clicked once. A new screen. Rivera, Miguel, case hashtag 22-413B. The day of the arrest, Officer Knox stated that he smelled marijuana coming from the vehicle. Based on that, he initiated a search that led to the discovery of narcotics. She turned back to Knox, who now sat with a subtle sheen of sweat along his forehead. Officer Knox, you swore that the reason for the stop was a broken taillight and the odor of marijuana. Is that still your testimony? Yes. Are you aware that the body cam footage you submitted ends 4 minutes before the search begins? The courtroom paused. Even Judge Monroe leaned slightly forward. There was a malfunction. That's odd, Lena said, pulling up a tech report, because the department's body cam audit shows your device functioned properly for the entire shift. In the footage, the missing 4 minutes were manually deleted. Knox opened his mouth. Closed it. Lena's voice lowered. Did you delete those 4 minutes, Officer Knox? I can't say. She took a step forward. Or won't. The prosecutor stood. Objection. Sustained, Judge Monroe said. But the officer will answer. Knox looked at the judge, then at the jury, and then, the most dangerous thing, at Lena. I don't remember. Lena tilted her head. You don't remember deleting the only footage that could confirm or deny the legality of a search that now threatens to put a man away for 11 years? Silence. The jury looked like they'd been punched. Judge Monroe tapped her notes. Does the defense intend to introduce further evidence? Lena nodded. Yes, Your Honor. We'll be submitting a motion to suppress the search on the basis of evidence tampering and constitutional violation. The prosecutor leaned forward, whispering furiously to Knox. But it was too late. Because now, the jury didn't just doubt the stop. They doubted the man who made it. And doubt is poison in a trial built on a badge. The afternoon session began with a name that wasn't in the original witness list. Your Honor, Lena said, rising again, the defense would like to call Denise Holloway. The courtroom stirred. Even the prosecutor blinked. We object. This witness wasn't disclosed. She was discovered during the recess after a civilian inquiry from the oversight records entered into evidence yesterday, Lena replied. She's directly relevant. Judge Monroe glanced at both sides. Let's hear her. The door at the side of the courtroom opened, and walked a woman in her late 50s, small-framed, dressed plainly, but with a spine like rebar. She took the stand slowly, holding a manila envelope. Please state your name. Denise Holloway. And your relationship to this case? She took a breath. None. Not until yesterday. But I know Officer Knox. I filed a complaint against him 5 years ago. It was dismissed. Lena nodded. Can you describe what happened? Denise glanced at the jury, then at Knox, who had gone still, the blood draining from his face. I was pulled over while driving home from my job as a night nurse. Officer Knox claimed I was swerving. Said he smelled alcohol. Asked me to step out. I told him I hadn't had anything to drink. I was tired, yes, but not impaired. Her voice didn't tremble. It hardened. He made me take off my shoes. On the asphalt. In January. Made me walk a line. Then said I was borderline and brought me in anyway. I spent the night in holding. Blood test came back clean. Case dropped. No apology. Lena stepped closer. Did you file a complaint? Yes. Internal affairs. I followed the process. And what happened? She opened the manila envelope. They said the body cam footage was incomplete, that there was insufficient evidence. But I took photos of the bruises from the cuffs. And I printed out a copy of my BAC test. 0.0. She handed the documents to Lena, who submitted them to the court. No arrest record. No hearing. Just trauma. Quietly buried. Denise turned toward the jury. I wasn't the first. And I know I wasn't the last. Knox sat as if made of stone. Lena let the silence do what her voice never could. Carry weight. She looked at the jury. How many more women like Denise? How many more men like Miguel? The answer echoed in the room without ever being spoken. Because every eye in the gallery knew, too many. Knox didn't show up the next day. Officially, he'd been placed on administrative leave. Unofficially, whispers rippled through the courthouse like cracks in glass that the department had launched an internal investigation overnight, that the Civilian Oversight Board had convened an emergency session, that the DA's office was no longer sure it could survive what Lena had just started. But Lena showed up. So did Miguel Rivera, wearing a borrowed suit and the nervous stiffness of someone who hadn't believed this day would come. The judge called the courtroom to order. Due to the developments of the past 48 hours, Monroe began, and in light of the defense's motion to suppress, the court has reviewed the legality of the search that resulted in the charges against Mr. Rivera. She paused, and the room went still. The court finds that the search was conducted without sufficient probable cause and that evidence was obtained in violation of the Fourth Amendment. She turned her gaze to the prosecution. Therefore, all charges are dismissed. Miguel didn't move. Not at first. He blinked like someone waking up too fast. Then turned to Lena, wide-eyed. Did we just win? Lena nodded. We didn't win, she whispered. We stopped a loss. Miguel stood slowly. His mother burst into tears. The courtroom, packed now with community advocates and reporters, erupted in applause. The prosecutor didn't wait for the noise to settle. He gathered his files and left through the side door, face pale, lips pressed thin, not from shame, but calculation. Damage control had already begun. Judge Monroe gavelled once, twice. Order, she said, but there was no conviction in it. She knew what had just happened wasn't just a case closing, it was a beginning. Something had shifted. Maybe not enough, but enough to notice. Lena walked out of the courtroom into a hallway that now felt heavier with eyes, media, victims, other attorneys. A few nodded. A few whispered her name like they had just learned it. She spotted the young law clerk who'd handed her the old recusal file. He met her eyes. There's more, he said quietly. Other cases. Records that don't match. Lena narrowed her gaze. How many? He swallowed. Dozens. She didn't smile. She just reached for her phone. Because justice had just drawn blood. And Lena Washington wasn't done cutting. The Rivera case had closed. But the story, the real one, was still unspooling. Lena sat in a dim back office at the public defender's office 2 nights later, staring at a corkboard that looked more like a detective's wall than a lawyer's. Strings connected names. Arrows linked dates. And at the center, Officer Garrett Knox, not a person anymore, but a node in a network. Behind her, Miguel stood in the doorway holding 2 paper cups of gas station coffee. They're saying your closing argument is trending, he said. People are sharing the footage. Lena didn't look up. Let them. Miguel hesitated. Why are you still here? Now she did look up. Because if one cop lies in a report, maybe he's just a liar. But if 6 reports have the same lie, in different cases, across different precincts, then it's not about him anymore. It's about the system that let him lie. She pointed to a document pinned beneath a photo of a young woman, the same Denise Holloway who had testified. This is the real case, Miguel. Not the one in court. The one they don't file. The one they don't want people to know they're losing. He stepped closer, looking at the board. The others, he asked. Are they going to get justice too? Lena exhaled slowly. Not unless someone forces it. Behind them, her phone vibrated. A new text. Anonymous tip, Judge Wallace recused twice more. Both cases involved Knox. Both ended in dismissals. Attached, IA memo. Classified. Verify. She clicked the attachment. A memo heavily redacted, dated 18 months ago, referencing Knox's disciplinary exemption status. Language used only for officers protected by top brass. Miguel read over her shoulder. That means someone was covering for him. Lena's voice was a whisper now. Not someone. She zoomed in on the approval signature at the bottom. Deputy Chief Vernon Blake. She leaned back. That's 3 layers up the chain. A whole staircase built out of silence. Miguel stared at the screen. What are you going to do? Lena reached for a fresh legal pad. Same thing I did in court. She drew a circle around the name. And start with the next badge. It didn't take long for Lena to realize what she was stepping into wasn't a tree with rotten branches. It was the soil itself. The internal affairs memo she received wasn't just a fluke. It was part of a sealed review program that offered disciplinary shielding to officers with high-value testimony records. Meaning, if a cop like Knox had ever helped put away a major player, their missteps were quietly buried to protect that conviction's integrity. Lena sat across from a former IA investigator in a parking lot off Mission Street, a man who now worked nights at a security firm and never showed his badge in public anymore. Knox was never supposed to last this long, the man said, lighting a cigarette with hands that trembled. He was a wrecking ball with a uniform. They used him when they needed a case closed, not a case solved. Lena's voice stayed low. Who's they? He exhaled smoke. Start with Blake. But it goes higher. People like Knox, they're useful. They scare juries. They get media coverage. They play well on paper. She opened her folder, showing him the list of closed cases. He winced. Yeah, he said. That's your pattern. You ever say anything? He looked away. Once. Got transferred to desk duty in 3 hours. My IA report disappeared the same day. That night, Lena drafted a motion, not for a single case, but for a judicial inquiry. She was going to file it under the Racial Disparity Accountability Act, a rarely used piece of legislation that allowed attorneys to challenge patterns of racial bias in policing through the courts. It had only been used twice in the state. Both times, it had been dismissed. But Lena had something different. She had proof. At home, she sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop open, records splayed out like a crime scene. Miguel called just past midnight. You okay? He asked. She didn't answer right away. She stared at a still image from bodycam footage of Knox shoving a teenager against a wall, the timestamp deliberately cropped. I think, she said slowly, this case isn't the headline. What is? She closed the image. The next one. Because Knox might have been the face. But someone else had always held the pen. The subpoena hit Deputy Chief Blake's office at 8:03 a.m. By 8:27, Lena received the first threat. A manila envelope, no return address, left at her apartment door. Inside, a black and white photo of her walking to court, circled in red ink. Below it, a single line typed on an old Remington. You're confusing justice with ambition. She stared at it for a long time, then slid it into a new file marked Fear Tactics, noted. But fear had never been Lena's compass. Truth was, and truth doesn't backpedal. She brought the subpoena to the courthouse herself, served Blake's office through the Public Records Division, ensuring a timestamp trail. The motion to compel followed, citing obstruction, data suppression, and a potential conspiracy to defraud the court. She knew what would come next: media spin, internal leaks, character assassination. And she was right. That evening, an article surfaced, defense attorney accused of bias in high-profile police case. No author, no verifiable sources, just enough detail to smear. The same reporter who ran it had previously published press releases from the police union verbatim. But Lena was ready. She had her own press contacts now, and her own narrative. She called a press conference on the courthouse steps the next morning. The badge, she said into a dozen microphones, is a symbol, not a shield. And if we can't question the men who wear it, if we can't hold them accountable for the lives they wreck, then we don't have law. We have performance. Behind her stood Miguel, Denise Holloway, 3 former clients whose charges had been dropped after false testimony from Knox. I'm not here to make noise, Lena finished. I'm here to clear the smoke and show people where the fire is. And people listened. Because it wasn't just about Garrett Knox anymore. It was about the scaffolding that held men like him in place. That scaffolding had names. And Lena had just made them visible. The public hearing was scheduled for Monday morning. But by Sunday night, the city was already bracing for impact. Deputy Chief Blake's office released a statement calling the allegations baseless distractions from a criminal justice system that functions with integrity. But Lena had already leaked the documents. Every redacted file, every disciplinary exemption, every false testimony logged under administrative discretion. By the time the statement aired, it was already irrelevant. The night before the hearing, Lena received a knock on her door. Not a threat this time. It was Judge Monroe. Out of robe, dressed in a simple gray coat, her eyes tired but fierce. You've stirred a hornet's nest, Monroe said, stepping into Lena's modest apartment. You know that. Lena offered tea. I didn't stir it, she replied. I pulled back the curtain. Monroe sat, glanced over the folders strewn across Lena's table. This is going to divide the courthouse. It already has. Monroe sipped her tea, then set the cup down with care. I'll testify. Lena froze. You sure? Monroe nodded. I sat through too many trials where truth was bent into silence. I told myself I couldn't change it, that I had to stay neutral. But I've seen what silence buys. And it's not justice. Lena leaned forward. Then let's tear it down. The next morning, the hearing room overflowed. Attorneys lined the walls. Reporters packed every spare inch. Even the mayor sent a representative, silent, anxious, tight-lipped. Lena presented first. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't pace. She laid out facts like bricks, Knox's false statements, Wallace's recusals, Blake's administrative shields, and the disproportionate weight all of it landed on Black and Latino defendants. Then she handed the floor to Monroe. The judge's voice didn't waver. I saw it. I let it happen. I rationalized it for too long. But this court is not supposed to be a stage for bias. It's supposed to be a safeguard against it. And we failed. Gasps. No gavel this time. No one dared interrupt. By the time she stepped down, no one saw her as just a judge anymore. She was a witness. And her testimony cracked the shield wide open. After Judge Monroe's testimony, the room didn't just shift, it tipped. One by one, others followed. A retired sergeant stepped up, shaking, tears in his eyes. We were told to overlook Knox's reports. Don't ask questions, they said. Just sign off. We all did it. Then a young assistant DA, I was told to push cases through. Told to rely on his testimony even when it didn't match the paperwork. When I objected, I was sidelined. It wasn't a hearing anymore. It was a confession. A cathedral of complicity where each voice added another crack to the glass walls. Deputy Chief Blake didn't attend, but his absence said more than any defense could. His name now appeared in 2 separate memos where civilian complaints were redirected before they could trigger internal investigation. Lena watched it all, silent, barely moving. She wasn't just collecting truth now. She was exposing a blueprint. But the most chilling moment came when the clerk from Judge Wallace's chambers asked to speak. I was the one who typed the recusal statements, she said. I was told to leave out details. Family acquaintance instead of niece. Administrative overlap instead of testimony under investigation. We weren't writing disclosures. We were writing shields. It ended with the board calling a motion. Unanimous vote. Formal judicial inquiry into systemic bias, evidence suppression, and misconduct at the highest levels of the department and court. They would seek federal oversight, a special prosecutor, and full public transparency. Outside the hearing room, Lena stepped into the sunlight for the first time in hours. Miguel waited there, leaning against the railing, arms folded, eyes proud but heavy. You did it, he said. No, she replied. We did. He looked out across the courthouse plaza. Think they'll fix it? Lena followed his gaze. Across the square, someone had spray-painted on the sidewalk. No badge is above the law. She turned to him. They won't have a choice. The first resignation came that night. Judge Wallace. A handwritten letter. No press conference. No apology. Just a statement left on the courthouse bench. I failed the robe. And the people beneath it. By morning, Deputy Chief Blake was on administrative suspension, pending federal review. 3 officers had already flipped, exchanging immunity for testimony. Knox, now stripped of his badge, faced not just public disgrace, but federal indictment for perjury, obstruction, and civil rights violations. But for Lena, none of that brought satisfaction. Because none of it returned the years Miguel had spent haunted by a record. None of it erased Denise's humiliation on the asphalt. None of it pulled back the veil on the hundreds, maybe thousands, who never got a courtroom, never got a Lena Washington, never even got to speak. At her desk, Lena sorted boxes not of victory, but of obligation. Case files that needed reopening. Letters from families. Calls from law students asking for internships. The world was watching now. That was the danger and the gift. Miguel stopped by one last time before heading to his job interview. Public Housing Board, he said. They said the case dismissal made a difference. You'll kill it, Lena smiled. He hesitated. Why'd you take it so personally? Lena leaned back in her chair. Because I knew men like Knox. I saw them in courtrooms growing up. Saw them on the sidewalk. They never looked twice at someone like me unless they needed someone to blame. And now, she said, they have to look. Miguel smiled. But before he left, he handed her something, a folded newspaper. The front page, City launches independent commission to review 15 years of police misconduct. A photo beneath it, Lena, standing at the courthouse steps, wind in her blazer, voice frozen mid-sentence. The caption read, "The reckoning begins." She set the paper down, staring out her window. Because the headlines would fade. But the story? It was just getting loud enough to echo. It rained the day Garrett Knox was arraigned. Not hard, just enough to smear headlines in newspaper boxes and slow the march of feet around the courthouse. The same courthouse where he once strutted through security without a glance. Now, shackled and flanked by 2 federal marshals, he barely raised his eyes. Inside, Lena sat on the opposite bench. She wasn't there as counsel. She wasn't even speaking. She was there to witness the system blink. A judge read the charges aloud. 5 counts of perjury, obstruction of justice, 2 federal civil rights violations. He pled not guilty. Of course he did. Arrogance, even cornered, dies slow. But the room wasn't just full of lawyers. It was full of ghosts. Denise Holloway, Miguel Rivera, the clerk who came forward, Monroe in civilian clothes. 2 teenagers Lena had once represented pro bono, both cases dismissed after Knox's paperwork fell apart. They weren't watching a man fall. They were watching a system get named. And naming is power. Outside, as the hearing ended, Lena stood alone under the courthouse awning. The rain hit the stone like a slow drumbeat. The same reporter who once parroted the police union now waited across the sidewalk, camera slung, voice hesitant. "Ms. Washington," he called out. "Any statement?" She looked up at him. Then at the courthouse. "No badge," she said, "is born sacred. It's the people, the victims, the fighters, the truth-tellers, who give the law its spine." "And what happens now?" he asked. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. "We build something better." The wind lifted her coat as she walked away. Not toward applause. Not toward safety. But toward the next name. The next file. The next fight. Because justice isn't a gavel or a robe or a verdict. It's a decision. One you make again. And again. And again. Until power remembers who it was meant to serve.